This question raises actually an interesting concept from psychotherapy, which is called transference. It's not as complicated as it sounds. The notion is just that we transfer our expectations and predictions from old situations, things that happen to us, onto the future. And particularly that can happen with relationships. So if you have a bad relationship, just the way you had with this abusive ex, a really negative experience, you might see someone who reminds you of your ex, which is pretty much what's going on here, and transfer those same negative predictions and expectations onto that new person. This can happen unconsciously. It's a bit like a Pavlovian response. You know, Pavlov was a scientist who trained his dogs to expect to be fed whenever they heard a bell ring. So he'd ring this bell, and the dogs would start to salivate. And the idea is that they would hear any bell they heard, they would immediately begin to think, "Oh, okay, food is coming." They would transfer the expectations and predictions from one situation onto another one. Now, the problem with transferring expectations like that is that it may not be accurate. And I think that's what you're sensing here. You're sensing that you may be overreacting to this new person by sort of unconsciously mixing him up in your mind with this abusive ex of yours. Typically, what we say in therapy is that you can tell a transference reaction because it will be inappropriate in object and inappropriate in degree, which means that you're having a person who's really not a very important person in your life, the inappropriate object. Somehow you're having a very strong reaction to that person. That's the inappropriate in degree part. So you're having a much too strong reaction to someone who really doesn't seem that important to you. And I think that's what's going on here. This is what you're picking up on, is that it seems strange to have such a negative response to somebody when there really isn't all that much. He's just a guy at work, and yet somehow or other you can't stop thinking about your abusive ex, and you can't stop having this very strongly negative reaction. Now, therapy is all about awareness. It's not about change, and we say that just because of instances like this. I don't know what ultimately you're going to decide to do in terms of this other person, but I do want to make you aware of unconscious stuff that might be controlling that response. Okay, so the idea is, again, this might be a good person for you or it might be a bad person for you. I mean, who knows? Maybe your spider senses are tingling here because this guy really is kind of a nasty character, and maybe he does remind you of your abusive ex for a good reason. Maybe there are warning signs. On the other hand, if it's simply that he looks like your ex, or he's the same age as your ex, or he's a guy with a similar background as your ex, and something like that is triggering an unconscious response that's actually irrational, you want to know that so that you can get a hold of it and say, "Hey, wake up! Let's not be unconscious. Let's make a conscious decision." The idea again is awareness and consciousness, to live consciously and to be in control of your own responses, not to be on autopilot, not to have someone else driving the car. Listen, you can wake up. You can say, "Okay, I remember my ex, and this guy is reminding me in some way of my ex. Well, how is he reminding you? Take a look at him and try to figure it out. If he just looks like him, well, that doesn't mean much. But if he's behaving in ways that your ex used to behave, in ways that are a little abusive or seem to suggest that he might be, a bad sort of person, a nasty character, then, maybe you're onto something. The trick really is simply to be awake, not to be asleep at the wheel, and to make your decisions about other people and about, how you are going to interact with them in a conscious, aware fashion.